Giving students choice to communicate learning, a differentiated approach to assessments by Sarah Christensen. Albert Einstein once said, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." Today's society, we use a standardized test to judge all of our students. My action research proposal is about using differentiation for our assessments in order to get the best quality work out of our kids. I came to the conclusion that I needed to differentiate my assessments for my students because I always differentiate my instruction for them, and why give all of my students the same test when they all don't learn and provide communication the same way? I wanted to make sure that my students were owning up to the capabilities that they knew they had and the confidence that they knew they had in math without making them write all the time, especially to explain their thinking. I definitely thought with math this was an issue, so I decided to take it to the test to see whether or not giving them choice would help them. I came up with these questions. To what extent does giving students choice to communicate their learning provide better student engagement? To what extent does giving students choice to communicate their learning result in higher content knowledge? Do students prefer having choice in order to communicate their learning? And in what ways do students choose their method of communication? The two formats I chose were verbal and written. One of the formats that they could use for verbal was using the video camera on the iPad. They could video record themselves showing and explaining their math work as they do it. Another verbal format is to use EduCreations, which is an app on the iPad, which allows students to show and record themselves as they explain and show their thinking. The written test that I used was part of our curriculum unit test at the end. It was a 3-page long written test which basically showed if they understood the concepts I was testing them on. Because the verbal test was mostly explaining, it was considerably shorter. It only had 4 problems, which allowed me to see if they understood the concepts or not. In order to make both assessments fair, I used the Colorado State Common Core standards in order to create a rubric where students knew what they were being assessed on. During the pre- and post-assessments, I did a time on task in order to gather data based on my students' engagement for 20 minutes of the test. After analyzing my data for the pre- and post-test engagement of each student, the results showed that on average there were 2.2 distractions during the pre-test, which was given the written test for every student. For the post-test, when students had choice, the average for distractions was less than 1 per student, which shows that the engagement went up as students got to choose their assessment. In order to get content knowledge scores, I first had to give students the choice for their assessment. After analyzing that and putting in their scores, I then had to give students the opposite test of what they chose in order to compare their scores. What was interesting was the students who chose their assessment did better on their tests than when they were forced to take the test that was not their choice. Do students prefer to have choices in their assessments? Absolutely. Yes, 100% of my students preferred choice. And how did students choose their method? One of them said, "It helps me explain my thinking more, and writing is my favorite subject." Another one said, because it is easier to do, easy to explain, and you get it better and understand it. And yet another one said, it's easier to explain and say it instead of just writing. Overall, the research showed me that when students are given a choice in assessment, whether it's verbal or written, their engagement went up. Students could prove their skills on their own without being hindered by some other factor. And students prefer choices, and they chose those based on their comfort level with what was provided for them. This research presentation really helped open my eyes to what students can do and that we can't limit them in their own communication skills. I hope to completely overhaul my assessments in the future in order to give my students the best chance at letting me see their skills.